Good morning, everyone. Welcome to beautiful far north Queensland. I made sure we turned on the weather for you. I hope you've all got your sunblock on and your hats. My name is Elida Faith and I'm the Labor candidate for Leichhardt, and I'm joined today by Labor's leader Anthony Albanese, our Shadow Treasurer Jim Chalmers and Cairns' very own Senator Nita Green. It is heartwarming to see so many holiday makers make their way up to our beautiful patch of paradise for the Easter long weekend. It's a long time coming and it's absolutely wonderful. COVID has been tough for far north Queensland families and businesses, and Jim and Anthony are certainly no strangers to far north Queensland. When we were doing it tough, Anthony was up here talking to our small businesses, talking to people out in the community, and more importantly, listening. And Anthony, thank you so much. Anthony doesn't just turn up when things are going well. He turns up when things are tough. And far north Queenslanders are telling me every day when I'm out there that they are sick of being neglected, they're sick of being left behind by the Morrison government. And again, Anthony and Jim, welcome back to beautiful far north Queensland this Easter weekend. And I'm going to hand over now to Anthony. Thank you.
Sorry, Anthony. Thanks very much, Elida, and it's great to be back here in far north Queensland with yourself and Senator Nita Green, and congratulations on your recent arrival, Nita. And it's good to be here with Jim. Jim will make some comments after I do, and then we'll take some questions. Look, every time you come to this part of the world, you hear about the Great Barrier Reef. You hear about the importance of the tourism sector. And indeed, the Great Barrier Reef is important, not just for jobs, but obviously it's important as a pristine natural wonder, one of the great wonders of the world. We need to make sure that we protect it. And to do that, we have to act on climate change. Now, this government have had 22 separate policies on energy and climate, and they haven't landed a single one of them. Labor has our plan of powering the nation, our plan that will create 604,000 new jobs, 5 out of every 6 of them in regional Australia. Our plan that will result in $52 billion of private sector investment. Our plan that will reduce emissions by 43% by 2030. It's a proper plan that understands that action on climate change is not only good for protecting the environment and protecting the reef and protecting the jobs that come here in far north Queensland, but indeed with a multiplier throughout the entire national economy from the Great Barrier Reef. It comes with opportunity to expand. One of the recent times I was here with Elida, we went to a solar manufacturing facility here in Cairns, producing solar panels. There are too few of them produced here. We see that action on climate change, which will result in cheaper power, which will advance manufacturing, including manufacturing for renewables, but also in a range of other areas as well, will be good for job creation as well. So I think at this election, one of the stark contrasts between us and our opponents is a Labor Party that understands the need to act on climate change, is a Labor Party that's united around our policy position, and our opponents who are all over the shop. Our opponents who say they'll actually cut more than 26 to 28% by 2030, but they won't commit to it because Barnaby Joyce won't let them. We know that. There are still sceptics in the coalition who don't even believe that climate change is real, even though we know the natural disasters, floods, fires, cyclones are all not just anticipated to be more often and more extreme. That is what has been happening in the last few years. If you want action on climate change and you want to end the climate wars, then people need to vote for the party that has a policy that's been supported not just by the Business Council of Australia, not just by Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, not just by the National Farmers Federation, the Australian Industry Group, the ACTU. It's one that has overwhelming support, I believe, from the Australian community who understand that these events are making an impact on everyone's lives and that we need to act on it. The second issue I want to raise is the issue of a National Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, Scott Morrison, when he became Prime Minister after the coup that removed the elected Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull in 2018, committed to a National Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, we know the reason why Scott Morrison doesn't have a National Anti-Corruption Commission is sitting on his front bench. The fact that there have been so many integrity issues raised against minister after minister, the sports rorts affair, the commuter car parks affair, the abuse of so much of taxpayer funds that's been used as if it's Liberal Party funds. And then we have issues like the correspondence that was dropped out from Angus Taylor's office about Clover Moore that simply wasn't true and was made up. Then there was the purchase of land worth $3 million where the government paid $30 million for it. We have other abuses of taxpayer funds, like the $444 million that was given to the Great Barrier Reef Foundation, an organisation that at the time had 10 employees and was given to them after a half-an-hour meeting. No tender process, no application. They didn't even ask for it. They didn't go into the meeting. They themselves say no one was more surprised than them that you went into a meeting and walked out with $444 million of taxpayers' money. Now, if we want a National Anti-Corruption Commission, it's very clear that not only has Scott Morrison failed to legislate for one, not only has he failed to introduce legislation, he's now saying somehow once again, in perhaps the greatest underlining element of Scott Morrison's characteristic of always looking to blame someone else, somehow it's the Labor Party's fault that he hasn't introduced legislation into a National Anti-Corruption Commission. It fails the laugh test, but it also fails the integrity test. And Scott Morrison's government fails the integrity test. If we want action on climate change, people need to elect a Labor government. If we want to end the climate wars, people need to elect a Labor government. If we want a National Integrity Commission, people need to elect a Labor government.
Thanks very much, Anthony. We know that the road to a better future for Australia goes through Queensland, and that's as it should be. And that's why we're here today with Elida and with Nita and with all of you. Anthony in Queensland is like a second home for Anthony. He has a natural affinity with Queenslanders and he has treated this place like a second home, and it's really terrific to see him here once again. We know that we have to work twice as hard for every vote in Queensland. We are up for that challenge. The Prime Minister has consistently and repeatedly turned his back on Queenslanders when we need him the most. Whether it's during floods, whether it's during the pandemic, this is a Prime Minister who goes missing when Queenslanders need him. Now, he had the gall today to say that his government has been tested. This Prime Minister has failed every test at every turn. This is a Prime Minister, when he was tested by bushfires, went to Hawaii. This is a Prime Minister tested by the pandemic, didn't order enough rapid tests, didn't order enough vaccines. This is a Prime Minister tested by floods who went missing and treated flood relief as just another partisan, divisive thing for him to try and take advantage of. So if the Prime Minister wants to talk about tests, this is a Prime Minister that has failed every test at every single turn. He wants to talk about the management of money. This Morrison government has borrowed more, taxed more and spent more than Labor did, but delivered less. The reason they have delivered so little, the reason why they don't have enough to show for $1 trillion in debt, is because the budget is absolutely chock full of rorts and waste, and a budget which is corrupted by Scott Morrison's incompetence. So if he wants to talk about management of money, let's talk about more than $20 billion of JobKeeper for businesses which didn't need it, which prevented the businesses here in the tropical north from getting the assistance that they needed and deserved when times were tough. Let's talk about $5.5 billion wasted on submarines that'll never be built. Let's talk about land rorts and sports rorts and car park rorts and all of the rest of it, rorted community programs. The government wants to talk about responsible economic management. Let's have a debate about the government being the most wasteful government in the history of our federation. The only reason they talk about Labor is because they want to distract from the fact that they've got $1 trillion in debt with almost nothing to show for it. They've taxed more, borrowed more and spent more, but delivered less than Labor, and that's because the budget is corrupted by Scott Morrison's incompetence.
Mr. Albanese,
Sure.
The New South Wales Liberal Treasurer, Matt Cain, has called for the Liberal candidate for Warringah, Catherine Deeds, to be disendorsed over comments about trans people. Should she be disendorsed?
Well, it's the Liberal Party themselves that are saying this. This is the Liberal Party whose New South Wales branch is tearing itself apart. This has been a civil war that has been going on within the New South Wales branch of the Liberal Party for over a year now. And what's extraordinary is that Catherine Deves has been handpicked by the Prime Minister. She is the Prime Minister's own choice. The Prime Minister earlier this week said that he shared Ms Deves' values in endorsing her yet again. And the last pick, who was the Prime Minister's last captain's pick? Craig Kelly. He has a great record, doesn't he? He's prepared to intervene to knock over local branch members in order to select candidates who their own people in the Liberal Party are calling upon the Prime Minister to show leadership. This is the Treasurer of New South Wales, Matt Cain. He is a serious player in the Liberal Party. Walter Villatora, another local activist, someone who's been very prominent in the organisational wing, is also warning about what's occurred. There is a revolt amongst Liberal Party members in electorates like Hughes. There is a range of candidates have been imposed from outside, and Scott Morrison's judgment. I saw the press conference that he just held, where he refuses to accept responsibility once again. He's always looking to blame someone else. It's very clear that the selection of this candidate isn't just dividing the country, it's dividing the Liberal Party.
On Thursday, you said that your candidate, Dan Rapopoulos, shouldn't be held to account for comments he's made on social media. Does the same standard not apply to Labor candidates?
In his 20s. This is comments that were made a very, very long time ago by Mr Rapopoulos. A very long time ago. This candidate in Warringah, this has been her main political approach has been on these issues, as opposed to Mr Rapopoulos, who quite frankly, his main approach in his 20s was winning medals and representing Australia at Games.
Industry groups you still really haven't answered Lucy's question. Should Catherine Deves be disendorsed? What is your opinion on that?
Well, it's a matter for the Liberal Party. But if I was Scott Morrison, I wouldn't have selected her in the first place.
Mr Albanese, industry groups have sounded the alarm about portable entitlements under your Jobs Australia plan. So who will the portable entitlements capture, which industries, and how much will it cost employers? Industries saying that's going to cost billions of dollars. So why haven't you outlined the plan before the election?
We have. Our policy that I announced in Brisbane more than a year ago was that we'd consult. That's the plan. This isn't something that we seek to impose on anybody. This is consistent with our plan to consult with business, to consult with unions, so we get win-win. That is our policy that was announced. I made it very clear at the time. I gave a major speech in Brisbane, just one of the many announcements that we have made on portable entitlements. Of course you can't have something imposed from above on everyone. But what it's about is we know there is more and more insecure work out there. We know that 500,000 Australians are working 3 jobs. That figure's doubled under this government's watch. And we need to work out ways in which, where it's possible, working in cooperation. That's in the interest of employers as well as employees.
That you're a risk to business. What do you make of that? The fact that so many think that you're a risk to business.
Well, I talked to the Business Council of Australia and I spoke to what was one of the largest gatherings, they tell me, that they've had of CEOs at was a semi-private event just weeks ago where 50 CEOs, including from very major companies, blue-collar companies, white-collar companies, gathered to engage with me. I have a really good relationship with the Business Council of Australia, with the Australian Industry Group, with a range of business bodies, and I'll continue to develop that constructive relationship. It's something I've always done. It's something I've always done and will continue to do.
Would it undermine the effectiveness of the integrity body if you legislate without bipartisan support in Parliament, if you don't have cross-chamber support? And secondly, can I get your reflections on the first week of the campaign? Has it been harder than you thought, and what do you say to Labor members that are maybe feeling a bit nervous after reflecting so?
The Integrity Commission issue is one in which we will legislate this year a National Anti-Corruption Commission. It will be a National Anti-Corruption Commission with teeth, one that has independent investigative powers. It's one that will be real, as opposed to their model that's been rejected by everyone. In terms of our plan going forward, we have enormous support across the board, not just, might I say, from within the Labor Party, but you've seen some of the response here today in terms of our plan for a better future for Australia. Our plan with 4 sub-themes of strengthening Medicare, of making sure that we have more secure work, of addressing cost of living issues, including providing cheaper childcare, cheaper energy prices, addressing issues like access to Medicare, and of course a future made in Australia that's also really important.
On the Integrity Commission,
Hang on. One is,
A real shortage in Cairns and Far North Queensland of GPs and also skilled workers. What is Labor's plan for helping us get through that barrier? Because at the moment there are people who are waiting weeks to see basic health care, and it is a huge problem, not just in the urban area like Cairns, but on the country.
yeah, no, it's a major issue. And that's why our plan is to prioritise strengthening Medicare and to make sure that, particularly in regional communities, we're fully aware that people are really struggling to get access to a GP, and when they do, they're paying more. We have some of our plans out there. We'll have more to say.
So how are you going to encourage
We'll-
more GPs
we'll
to
have-
come to Far North Queensland?
We'll have more to say about that in coming days. But we're absolutely committed to prioritising strengthening Medicare across the board. And we understand, I met with Advanced Cairns this morning, and it was one of the issues that was raised with them was the access to services here in Far North Queensland.
Albanese, on the Integrity Commission, if a Labor MP is accused of fronting the Integrity Commission, and if it's a minister, what action would you take? Would you stand them down from your front bench?
Well, what you would do is to make assessments at the time. If they're just there as a witness or assisting, obviously not. But if there are, what an anti-corruption commission does around the country is it provides investigations, and then there are charges laid. If there are any charges laid against anyone, then of course they should stand aside.
You obviously in a chat yesterday. Could I ask on religious freedom? You know, Labor has said it does support religious freedoms legislation. However, obviously you had concern about consequences for LGBT students. If you win government, what's your plan on religious freedom? Will you introduce your own bill to Parliament?
Yes, we will.
On the Anti-Corruption Commission, would you commit it to hold public hearings, and also would it scope your retrospective, and if so, how far back would it look?
Yes, there would be scope for public hearings if the Anti-Corruption Commission itself felt that was necessary. We would give them the capacity to do that, so that decision wasn't politicised. But the second part of the question, retrospective, that would be a matter for them. But I should imagine that because of a range of issues, I should imagine that they would want to look, but it would be a matter for them. We don't intend to. That's the difference between the models. Their model that they've got up is a so-called Integrity Commission, which would be controlled effectively by the government, would determine what it looks at. We want an independent commission that acts independently.
You say you've got a good relationship with business groups.
Hang on, and then either way.
Northern Far North Queensland is of strategic defence importance for Australia. Labor the current budget of the Defence Force, what would Labor do differently?
Yeah. The current budget is $48 billion, or 2.1, roughly rounded down, of GDP. I've said, and I said in my Lowy Institute speech, that defence spending will need to rise. We live in a more insecure world. We would say that it will be above 2. It will be above 2. It will be as necessary. We need to. What you shouldn't do is just. That's a flaw, if you like, rather than so. It needs to be above that, because what you need to do is to spend whatever is necessary to keep Australians safe. And the difference between us and them too is that it isn't just about the level of spending. What it's about is what you spend on and whether it produces an asset at the end. So this government has spent $5.5 billion that hasn't produced anything in terms of subs. Now that's not a good use of spending. That's not something they deserve credit for. That's something that has cost every Australian taxpayer an enormous amount. Going forward, we've said as well there'll be a Defence Force posture review. There hasn't been one for a decade since Labor was last in office, and the one before then was when Kim Beazley did one when he was Defence Minister. So what that will look at, and this is particularly relevant for the North here, that is so important. There are 900 personnel here at HMAS Cairns, either civil or defence personnel, and they play an important role here. We will look at, through the Defence Force posture review, whether other things can be done in the North as well. Quite clearly, given the nature of the strategic challenges that Australia faces, defence of the North has got to be critical, That's the other reason why, as well, we wouldn't have sold the Port of Darwin to a company that's linked to the Chinese Communist Party regime in Beijing.
You say you've got a good relationship with business groups.
Sorry, we've got...
Yeah, Claire.
The government had failed every test at every turn. But one of the tests they haven't failed was when you set them, which was that jobs would be the deciding factor on whether Australia got through the pandemic or not. With an unemployment due to have a 3 in front of it very shortly, you can see the government pass that test.
I'm pleased you asked that question, Claire. I said that in September 2020. And subsequent to that, hundreds of thousands of jobs were lost in our economy, which Josh Frydenberg wants you all to forget. There was hundreds of thousands of jobs lost in 2 months alone in 2021 because of the government's failures on vaccines and purpose-built quarantine. So hundreds of thousands of jobs were shed unnecessarily by this government. I know their spin and marketing since then wants to pretend away all of the human carnage that came with that joblessness, including in communities like this one in tropical North Queensland. Now, we want the unemployment rate to be as low as possible. And we've said, even with an unemployment rate coming down in welcome ways, we haven't seen real wages grow sufficiently to keep up with the skyrocketing cost of living, and we've got skill shortages which are being left unattended. The story of the labour market is broader than the unemployment rate. And in our labour market, we've got the unemployment rate falling in welcome ways, but we've got a situation where everything is going up except people's pay. We've got a situation where there are skills and labour shortages, particularly in pockets of Australia. Now, the government wants everybody to think that everything is fine in the economy. If you walk down the main streets of this country, as we have been, then we understand people are falling further and further behind because of skyrocketing costs of living and falling real wages in the government's own budget. And this comes to the choice at this election. Now, the Prime Minister wants to talk about the choice. This election is an opportunity to lock in a better future under Labor, and it's an opportunity to rule a line under the rorts and waste and chaos and corruption and incompetence that we've seen for the best part of a decade. Now, when it comes, one final point on the unemployment rate. Now, we will always seek to drive the unemployment rate as low as possible. The difference between us and the government is we actually have a plan to do that. And our plan is about training people for opportunities, creating a bigger workforce with cheaper, more accessible childcare, investing in advanced manufacturing in the care economy and the digital economy. This is how you get the unemployment low in sustainable ways, but also get real wages growing so working families can keep up. Can you begin the question again, please, Claire?
The quotes from anonymous quotes from your colleagues and others in the Labor Party splash all over the front page of the paper today. Was there a call for unity from Mr. Albanese this morning? Do you think that the party is much fit to go through the next 5 weeks, given that after 1 week there are numerous people that have clearly come out and condemned how the first week of the campaign has gone?
Of course we're match fit. Of course we are. We are up for the challenge of giving this country a better future under Labor and providing the kind of alternative that people are proud to vote for. And we have been putting in the work for years now on an alternative, whether it's a National Anti-Corruption Commission, whether it's getting real wages growing, whether it's growing the economy the right way. We have... Yeah, I read the papers like you do, Claire, and it's not my experience of this campaign.
Would you agree
We
that
have...
the worst weeks
I'll come to you in a
is
minute.
taken
I'll
still?
come to you in a minute, Jono. My experience is that all around Australia there is an appetite for something better than this current government. People are hurting because their wages aren't keeping up with the cost of living. That's what people are focused on, and that's what the Labor Party's focused on. And the choice is really clear. They can have a better future under Labor, or they can have another 3 years of the chaos and corruption and incompetence that we've seen for most of the last 10 years. That's the choice. That's what people are focused on. No matter what the commentary is from day to day, that's what we are maintaining a focus on. Jono.
Go back, steer away from that and go back to the economy. The economy currently has the lowest unemployment rate in decades. The economy is currently larger than before the pandemic.
As it should be.
As it should be. You supported the government spending $343 billion in health and economic measures, but you wanted to go further. You wanted to spend more on JobKeeper, $45 billion, which many would now say would have been wasted money. And you also wanted to spend an extra $6 billion on paying people to be vaccinated. How would the nation's debt not have been higher under your government?
Okay, well, there are a few parts of that, so let me unpack it. Obviously, we want the economy to be bigger and we want unemployment to be lower than it was before the pandemic. And clearly, when you're coming out of a recession in 2020, another deep downturn in 2021 that we didn't have to have, clearly there are going to be more jobs after the recession than during the recession. That's self-evident. What we tried to do for the last almost 3 years is to agree where we can with the government's policy and disagree where we must. And where there was substantial disagreement with the government was not necessarily on the level of support being provided in the economy, but the quality of that support. Now, Josh Frydenberg was warned repeatedly about wastage in the JobKeeper program. And this is an issue close to my heart, as I know it is to Nita's and Elida's and Anthony. Because if you just let me finish. The wastage in the JobKeeper program saw at least $20 billion go to companies which were already profitable and didn't need support, at the same time as the government was denying support to tourism operators and small businesses in this wonderful town that we're in now. And so our issue was with the incompetence of the government, the quality of the spending. Now, we have understood all along, and I've heard Anthony say this many times, of course you need to lean in and to provide support when there's a recession and when there's another downturn. But the quality of the spend matters as much as the quantity. And if you look through the government's budget, at the facts in the government's budget, leave all of the partisan differences aside, on the facts alone, the government's borrowed more, spent more and taxed more than the last Labor government and delivered less. The reason they've delivered less is because we have supported responsible support in the economy. We haven't supported almost a decade now of rorts and waste and mismanagement in a budget which has been corrupted by Scott Morrison's incompetence.
Mr. Albanese,
Yeah, a couple more.
You say you've got a good relationship with business groups, but the very ones that you listed earlier are worried that portable entitlements could cost employees billions. So can you just answer, please, which industries the portable entitlement scheme will capture?
I refer you to our policy that's very clear. There is no definition of capture because our policy is simply this, that we need to consult. It's an issue out there, we'll consult. We don't have a definitive position. The best way to advance the interests of workers and business together is a cooperative one. This is one of the things that, for example, could be discussed at the Full Employment Summit. We're not seeking to impose it. I answered questions on this at the time. Nothing has changed in our policy. We don't seek to impose this at all. It's just that in today's world, where a young person who's thinking about what their career prospects might be, whereas years ago they might have thought they'd do a job for a number of decades and rise up, the chances are they'll have a number of careers with a number of different employers. So in terms of entitlements and portability, that's something that should be a part of discussion. Last one.
Tony Burke said businesses would pay. How much will they
when
pay?
the Prime Minister was defending his legislation for Integrity Commission, he said he didn't want a New South Wales ICAC, which he describes as a kangaroo court, which has destroyed lives. Do you back the New South Wales ICAC's work? Do you share his view that there is collateral damage?
You know what I think's good? I think that it's good that the ICAC has held corrupt politicians to account, regardless of where they've come from. Last one. Last one. Who hasn't had? You haven't had one. Yeah.
In an interview with the Daily Telegraph, you were described as being not woke, and some advocates within the LGBTQIA+ community described those comments as transphobic. Does the Labor Party support trans Australians? And if a Labor candidate made any transphobic comments on social media, would the Labor Party disendorse them?
We support every human being and we respect every human being, and I did as part of that. If you look at that interview, I said I respect every human being for who they are. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Authorised by P. Erickson, ALP, Canberra.